I'm Rob Port from SayAnythingBlog.com, North Dakota's most popular political blog. I'm here with Steve Everly. He is a spokesman for Energy in Depth. It's an organization put on by the Independent Petroleum Producers of America to educate the public about things related to the oil industry. Steve, thanks for your time. And I wanted to ask you some questions about a recent report that came out from the United States Geological Survey linking fracking to earthquakes. What was interesting to me, though, as I was reading some of your work on this, and something that you pointed out was that it wasn't really fracking that had been linked to earthquakes specifically, but rather disposal of wastewater. What's the difference? Can you walk us through that?
Sure, and I think you point out an important distinction there. A wastewater injection well is a completely separate process. It's regulated under completely different rules. It has its own permitting process, completely separate from hydraulic fracturing. And as you said, the USGS did not, contrary to a lot of media reports, link hydraulic fracturing to earthquakes. And they've actually come out and said on multiple occasions since that the abstract was released that there is no evidence that hydraulic fracturing is triggering these earthquakes. The difference is that a wastewater injection well is, broadly speaking, any well that's used for industrial wastewater. A lot of that's from oil and gas production, but it can be from any number of different industrial processes. Just to kind of give you a couple numbers here, across the country there are about 150,000 what are called Class 2 injection wells. 40,000 of those are actual disposal wells for oil and gas operations. And according to this report and some other studies that have gone on, only a handful of those have induced any kind of noticeable seismic activity. I think it was the words were tiny fraction, according to the Department of Interior.
And when we're talking about, now obviously wastewater, so it's not the process of going down and fracking for the oil, but getting rid then of the wastewater that's used in the fracking process. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, an injection well is not hydraulically fractured, and that's another thing to kind of point out here too. When people try to say, well, there's these disposal wells, so it's hydraulic fracturing, and it's like hydraulic fracturing is a very specific process that takes place several thousand feet below the surface. It's a safe process. It's well regulated. It's tightly regulated by the states. And yeah, I mean, wastewater injection is a process that's been accompanying oil and gas production for decades. It's not anything new. And in fact, as the USGS and Department of Interior have pointed out, seismic activity related to wastewater injection goes back to at least the 1960s, where they saw some kind of noticeable seismic activity around the Denver area out in Colorado due to injection wells. And something else to point out here too is that when we talk about earthquakes, when we talk about seismic activity, a lot of people automatically think like the San Francisco earthquake. They think, buildings getting rocked off their foundations. A lot of these incidents are about a 3.0 or somewhere around there, which the USGS on their website, when they have their description or in their descriptions of earthquakes, you're looking at something that may be similar to the passing of a truck, and a lot of people won't even notice it. So in addition to it, let's kind of have a fact-based discussion here about what we're actually talking about versus what a lot of people are trying to scare people into thinking.
Well, I was going to bring that point up because obviously when you see headlines equating anything that the industry is doing, whether it's fracking or whether it's wastewater wells, linking it to earthquakes, I mean, that's a scary thing. I don't think there's anything maybe more disconcerting to humans than the idea that the very ground under our feet is going to start moving. So, earthquake, I think maybe loaded term's the wrong word for it, but it's a scary term. So when you're saying this, what you're actually saying is that these sort of earthquakes at the USGS, are these earthquakes that if they happened in an area where we lived, that we could actually feel them happen? I mean, would these be noticeable by human beings?
Some of them would. I mean, but like I said, the size of this particular activity that they're talking about, most of the cases, one thing I should point out too is that this particular report hasn't even been published in its entirety yet. That's coming out in a couple days. All we have is an abstract where they're just kind of summarizing what they're finding. So once that report comes out, we'll have a little bit better understanding of, what the different causes are, what the different impacts are, and frankly, what the next steps are. How can you deal with this? How can you mitigate this? What are the next steps? But in terms of the actual activity, like I said, a lot of people would think that this was just kind of a truck passing by, and a lot of people wouldn't even recognize it as an earthquake. So, yes, there is some seismic activity, and I shouldn't discount that. If people are concerned about this and people have questions about it, I think that's a perfectly healthy response. But I think it's also, the other part of that is to have the answers given based in fact and based in what the actual science is saying.
Yeah, I think that's accurate, and obviously I don't think we should rush off and jump to any conclusions, which unfortunately I think was a lot of the reactions to that the media reports that first surfaced about this study from the USGS. Let me ask you a question. Over time, obviously you talk about earthquakes being sort of related or linked to these wastewater wells going back into the 1960s. I mean, is this something that we should? I mean, obviously up here where I live in North Dakota, they're doing a lot of fracking. They've got some wastewater disposal wells and things like that. If they're creating those wells now, are those wells going to be linked to earthquakes, 20, 30, 40 years from now? Or is this just sort of something that happens around the time the wells are created?
Well, there's a variety of different answers to that, really. And I think one thing that we need to look at is how the industry not only has changed in the past couple of years, but how it is continuing to evolve and continuing to change to respond to some of these kinds of issues. In the Marcellus region in Pennsylvania, somewhere around 90% of the water is actually being reused. So rather than just using it once and then shipping it off to a disposal well, it's actually being reused. So you've got closed loop systems there, which will obviously reduce the amount of wastewater going into injection wells. And looking at those kinds of different issues can kind of mitigate some of this moving forward as the industry evolves. Something else to point out too that the USGS has spoken about is that these issues where they have come up are usually solved by very easy, quick fixes, such as just reducing the flow rate that is used for the injection wells. So if you're pumping a certain amount of fluid in there over a set period of time, you can actually, lengthen that time period out, and then you substantially reduce the risk of any kind of seismic activity from that. That has to do with some permitting issues. That has to do with, some of the companies that actually operate the wastewater wells. Some of them are on a learning curve. But again, once the USGS report actually comes out, we'll have, I think, a better understanding of what the specific issues are and how do you respond to that. And I think looking forward, I think it's safe to say that the industry is going to respond to this and is going to continue to evolve in a way that reduces any impacts like this, whether it's small seismic activity or anything else.
Well, I think that was going to be my next point, was that there are things. I mean, if this is an issue, and like you said, we'll find out more when the report comes out. There are things we can do to mitigate it or to solve it. Up to and including, I would imagine, finding another way to dispose of this water. Is there another way to dispose of this water other than putting it back into the ground?
Well, I think recycling and reuse is really kind of how industry is already responding to this. I mentioned the Marcellus. They're starting to move forward with a lot of this down in Texas, I know, as well. And different parts of the country, you've got different limitations based upon geology, based upon the specific, chemical makeup of the actual formations, what you're actually producing. There's a lot of variables in there. It's in some sense, it's kind of like asking how long is a piece of string in terms of, how these different things play out in the different areas. But, I think recycling and reuse is a big, a big potential benefit moving forward for the industry to move forward with that. I think when you have, the different injection wells, if you start looking at those in terms of what the flow rate is, reducing that rate, and so those injection wells are actually receiving something in a more manageable way. The EPA has described injection wells as a safe and inexpensive option for disposing of industrial waste. And they wouldn't be saying that if they were just inherently dangerous, if there was a hazard that was just, inherently a part of a disposal well. So there are some issues that need to be fixed, and there need to be some tweaks made. But again, the USGS has come out and said These problems are easily manageable. There's quick fixes to them, and it's going to be very easy to move forward to solve these kinds of problems.
Steve, thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot.